Evidence of the Scattering. Part B. South America. Okay, so you should be coming over from Part A of Part 10 of this series. These videos are a part of a docu-series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. So please, if you have not watched Parts 1 through 10A, please stop this video and start back from video 1 and watch them consecutively for true context. Okay, so we're continuing on from what was discussed in Part A. I originally made this video and split it up within 2 videos, but based on some of the things that were shown, the platform had some restrictions, so I'm trying my best to be creative in getting this information out properly without taking things out. I thank you for your patience and understanding. This is the second part to Part 10, which is dealing with the evidence of the scattering. In the first part, we dealt with the evidence of the history in the United States. To really prove the evidence of the scattering, what we need to do is move to the next part of this region and deal with South America. Here's what seems hard for people to understand. The prophecy of our scattering has been masqueraded and hid from our realization because it's labeled and classified around race. And though the scattering has been seen all over the world, because our world news does not report it as so, we, the people, do not see it as so. Our plight is surrounded by labels of being black and Afro. And so I'm going to show you what I mean. As I go through this, you will begin to see a pattern. We will start on this side of the world. This whole side of the world here, in which we call the Americas and the Caribbean, it is full of scattered Hebrew slaves that are cursed. If you look at the people of South America, their plight is very similar to ours in the United States. You know how we are African Americans? This is not just a label that's special to us. This is not just how we are labeled. In South America, there are Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Venezuelans, Afro-Colombians, etc. They are all scattered down here with this type of label. You know, my mother-in-law recently had some Brazilians come to her house to help her clean her house. She said when they came to the door, she was confused because she thought they were sisters. But then they started talking and they didn't know any English. They were actually Brazilian. They looked like our people here in the United States. Like if you didn't hear them talk, you would have thought they were Americans. But they were Brazilian. I had to explain to her that this is the scattering. This understanding is just not known or understood. You see, the media, it does a very bad job. Or you know what? Maybe we should say they do a good job, because their job is to just spread propaganda, not truth. But you only know of the world that they show you and not the reality. If you actually travel and looked at the world outside of the way the media presents, you would see that the same people that are called in the United States as African Americans or black people, they are in South American countries like Brazil and Colombia, and they face the same struggles as us in the United States. And they hold the label of black people or Afro whatever their country is. Let me show you. Let's start here in Brazil.
Brazil in 1500 was a wild and primitive land of savage animals. And the cannibalistic Indian, oldest inhabitant of the New World, predating both Portuguese and Negro by more than 1,000 years. In 1500, a Portuguese ship blown off its course arrived in Brazil. Colonists soon followed. Many were adventurers and criminals. To most, this barbaric country was a place of exile. The Portuguese came with no experience in farming and a distaste for work. A Renaissance humanist wrote, "If there are any people more given to laziness than the Portuguese, I do not know where it exists." Slavery seemed a convenient answer. The Portuguese attacked and massacred the Indian and made him the first slave in the New World. But the Indians failed to meet the rigid qualifications for slaves in the 16th century. They died by the thousands. A Spanish friar, Bartolomé de las Casas, gave up his land and slaves and returned to Spain, where he begged the Spanish regent for an end to the enslavement and slaughter of the Indians throughout Latin America. To save the Indians, Las Casas suggested an alternative candidate, the hardier African Negro. For these Africans, the Muslims, the Bantus, and the Sudanese, the trip over was the beginning of a tragic future. From 30 to 40 days, they crossed the South Atlantic. These sailing clippers were known as coffins. The slaves were kept in the hold from 5 in the afternoon until 8 in the morning in darkness. The loss of human cargo ran as high as 70%. When they arrived in Brazil, they were cataloged and sold. First, they were sent to the sugar plantation, for sugar was the unchallenged king of Brazil for many years. Then, gold was discovered, and the Negro worked in the gold mines of the New World. Almost any offense committed would result in whippings with a twisted raw leather hide. More serious crimes warranted more sophisticated punishments, such as fastening the slave for several days by his ankles or his arms. But the Negro was more assimilated in colonial Brazil than in North America. He was welcomed into the Catholic Church, where he was baptized and married. And the white colonist and Negro slave lived together intimately. Black nannies brought up the children. The Portuguese adapted African cooking. And the men who did not bring wives with them took on the Negro women as concubines, sometimes even married them. On May 13th, the Princess Regent banished slavery from Brazil as thousands of Brazilians roared their approval. Emancipation took 23 years longer, but one war less than in North America.
That's the history of slavery in Brazil. It sounds very similar to the United States history. It did not get better for them in Brazil. Again, they share the same plight. They suffer from racism the same way we do in the United States.
Racism in Brazil, one of the most diverse nations in the world, is dealing with a controversy over allegations of whitewashing. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. A telenovela or soap opera has reignited the discussion about race in Brazil. The story takes place in the state of Bahia, where nearly 80% of the population declares themselves as black or of mixed race. But all the main roles in that telenovela are played by white actors, highlighting the Afro-Brazilians' claim as lack of representation and visibility. CGTN's Lucrecia Franco has this report from Rio de Janeiro.
This is TV Globo's latest drama, Segundo Sol or Second Sun, set in Bahia, Brazil's blackest state, with an 80% black or mixed race population. Curiously, only 4 of the 27 main actors are of African descent. The show debuted in mid-May, and its overwhelming whiteness came as a shock to Laura Mendes and her family. Laura says the network has plenty of excellent black actors, but refuses to showcase them in starring roles.
Eles só são colocados como
They are cast in menial roles such as chauffeurs, doormen, and maids. We need to see them play characters that are highly valued by society.
ocupe espaços considerados pela sociedade.
27-year-old Katia Correia is finishing her bachelor's degree in languages at a federal university in Rio de Janeiro. She was fortunate to get here. The daughter of a driver and a secretary, she could not afford a private university. And despite hard work, her public school education was not enough to earn her a coveted spot in one of Brazil's prestigious public universities. Historically, those places go to wealthy white students educated privately. But thanks to a recent affirmative action law, she got her opportunity to study. The law, enacted in 2012, reserves 50% of spots in public universities for low-income students. Emphasis is placed on those who are of African or indigenous descent. For Katia, it's a dream come true.
Today, I am here at the university, and that is a victory for me, a black woman from Rio's periphery. Being here is a triumph, but it needs to expand.
Kat is still part of a racial minority at the university. According to the latest official data, only 13% of black students attended universities in 2015, though that was up from 5.5% 10 years earlier. Data shows white students are double the university attendance rates of blacks. Despite the significant increase in black enrollment in universities across Brazil, the affirmative action program is not without controversy. Darker skin has never been associated with privilege in Brazil. Afro-Brazilians continue to do most of the menial labor, earn on average half of what their white colleagues earn, and have less access to basic education. It is a grim legacy that experts say is, in large part, a result of the fact that in 1888, Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery.
So as you hear this account in Brazil about racism and their need for affirmative action, do you really think that it's because of their skin color that they suffer the same plight as us in the United States? That they suffer from receiving low-paying jobs and less privilege? It's because of their skin color? If you believe in the scriptures, how do you apply a view about skin color over biblical curses our Father has prophesied to his people that they would have if they were disobedient? These people are all fighting for the same thing as us in the United States.
Marching with friends and classmates, Lais Nascimento is not only demanding better education and healthcare, she's also demanding equality.
Even though people say we have no racism in Brazil, it's not true. We are the majority of the population, but we don't have economic or political power.
Like most people in the state of Salvador, Lais is Afro-Brazilian. But unlike many of her fellow protesters, she didn't grow up in a middle-class family. She lives in a poor neighborhood on the outskirts of the city and is the first person in her family to ever go to university.
Brazil is one of the most socially unequal countries in the world. We're selling the image that everything is good and will host a World Cup, but it's a country that denies opportunity to its own people.
Brazil has the biggest black population of any country outside Nigeria. Colonized by the Portuguese, over 10 million African slaves were sent here. Salvador was the capital of the slave trade in Brazil, and Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. Now, despite the fact that over 80% of the population here considers itself to be Afro-Brazilian, the city of Salvador has yet to elect a black mayor. Although Afro-Brazilian culture is celebrated throughout the country and internationally, statistically, blacks here suffer the worst when it comes to access to education, healthcare, and high-paying jobs. Even with such inequalities, Professor Fabio Lima says fewer blacks than whites are going to the protests.
Now, when you look at many of these people, there is something that I should highlight. When you think of Brazilians or Colombians, you do not think of the Afro-Brazilians or the Afro-Colombians, but a definitive look. People that look like Sofia Vergara. The media and television does a very good job of keeping us with a false mental idea of the world that is far from accurate. It should be noted that the culture in South America is very different than in North America because they encouraged intermingling. In America, they were against intermingling for a long time, as this woman said in the 60s.
And evidently he feels that they will be accepted socially. And I don't feel that they ever will be. But the whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites.
And this is why we have such a different look than many of them in South America. The Portuguese in South America were different than the Irish and Dutch settlers in the United States. The Portuguese encouraged intermingling, which is why the population of Brazil, they look so different. This is also why they have such a high population of what they call black people. They mixed in a great deal with the Portuguese settlers that were there and were called mulattoes. So their black population is a mixture of those who are pure Hebrew, not intermingled, and others, which is the majority, that are intermingled with the Portuguese. And that's why their look became different. Now, do you know how we have the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States because of cops killing so-called black people? Well, they go through the same thing over there. Look.
This is everyday life in Rio de Janeiro's slums. A city divided into rich and poor, black and white. In the Cidade Maravilhosa, or Marvelous City as Brazilians call it, police massacres are commonplace. Tainá de Medeiros is a human rights activist.
A polícia não é violenta por causa da ditadura de 64. Ela é violenta por causa da escravidão, que não acabou em 1888.
The police are accused of racism and brutality when fighting drug trafficking.
Realmente, nós temos uma maioria negra entre os mortos desses confrontos ou nessas ações criminosas. Mas eu não posso dizer também que há um racismo na seleção de alvos.
Brazil's history was profoundly shaped by the slave trade. For nearly 350 years, almost 5 million captive Africans landed here. That's 40% of the 12.5 million shipped against their will to the Americas. When Brazil banned slavery in 1888, the newly freed blacks were left to fend for themselves. Many favelas were created by former enslaved people.
O Brasil teve política pública de branqueamento da população, trazer europeus para cá para branquear o Brasil, porque assim iríamos solucionar todos os problemas. E esses brancos recebiam cotas, né? Cota de terra, cota em dinheiro e tal. E hoje em dia a gente está reivindicando cotas nas universidades, cotas nos espaços públicos, cotas no legislativo, no judiciário.
Yeah. Let's leave Brazil now and talk about Colombia.
Libardo Asprilla was 17 years old when he left his 14 siblings and his hometown of Chocó in Colombia's west and set out for opportunities in the country's capital.
The cold hit me hard. I didn't have enough jackets, a few pesos in my pocket, and a head full of dreams.
Asprilla's goal was education because he saw that as his ticket out of poverty. Official government data show more than 30% of Colombians of African descent are poor. Activist groups say the true figure is much higher.
Historically, the Afro-Colombian population has been hardest hit and is really left behind when it comes to their social and economic conditions. All of their indicators are below the national average.
Government statistics also show Colombia's black population suffers disproportionately from the country's continued armed struggle, victimized by rebel groups at a rate more than twice that of the non-black population.
African Colombians who flee regional violence or seek better economic opportunities often move to cities to work in the informal sector, taking jobs with no guaranteed income or social benefits, like street vendors.
Pues bueno, nosotros nos encontramos en San Basilio de Palenque, primer pueblo negro libre de América. Es una comunidad que tiene una lengua propia, tiene su música propia, sus diferentes manifestaciones culturales, mejor libro de cocina del mundo, en fin, entonces tiene una riqueza cultural que hemos heredado de africanos y eso nos hace feliz, contentos de estar aquí libres hoy en este pedazo de África en Colombia.
Known as KRMP, brings in the feminine sounds to Combiles a mí.
Siempre trato de mostrar la caracterización de la mujer palenquera donde voy. Siempre estoy así, siempre estoy con, no sé, como con ese vestido de lucha. Pues no, ahí siempre estoy trabajando por fortalecer nuestra identidad cultural y pensando siempre en la igualdad.
Identidad sangre negra, maco agro.
With Combiles a Mí, Kayla works directly with more than 70 kids in Palenque. She says she hopes to empower through music and action, instilling pride of their African heritage.
Que ustedes nunca lleguen a rizar su pelo porque consideren que su pelo es un problema. Ha visto tanta discriminación por nuestro pelo que muchas veces nosotros decidimos de rizarnos el pelo porque hay mucha gente que no conoce y no acepta nuestro pelo natural.
That's Colombia. And yeah, if you notice, they have the same plight as us in the United States, and also them in Brazil. They are considered black or Afro, and they have no history besides that they were taken as slaves from Africa. They just identify with Africa. No identity. Let's go to Argentina.
The Afro-Argentines are black immigrants from Africa who were enslaved in Argentina in the 18th century. Their large numbers formed a significant part of the Argentina population, but after a few years, their numbers decreased. In 1778, according to a census carried out by the Spanish Council, it was discovered that the Afro-Argentines were about 37% of Argentina's population. Many years later, they dropped to about 15% of the total population, and now Argentina is currently the whitest country in South America. Due to the limited population of the Afros, it's almost impossible to find them in notable careers such as sports, journalism, politics, and many more. In this video, we are going to be talking about the Afro-Argentines and what led to their reduction and eradication in Argentina. Let's dive right in. Their history. In the 16th century, black people were captured from their homelands in Africa and enslaved with their feet and hands chained. Some were from Cape Verde Islands, while the majority were from ethnic groups speaking Bantu languages, from territories, which comprise Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. There were a few Yoruba and Iwe. In the 1600s, according to an estimate, 12 million African slaves got to Latin America through slave ships. But while passing through the Atlantic, about 10 to 15% of the captured slaves died, and many more died during the process of enslavement while traveling through the interior part of Africa. There's a record of about 40 deaths for every 100 slaves who successfully reached the New World. Some of these black men were captured and taken to Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina. Their main commercial activity at the time was trading slaves for money. The slaves were forced to work in agriculture, livestock, domestic activities, and crafts. In urban areas, most slaves made handicrafts for sale, while the revenues earned went to their masters' pockets. The Buenos Aires neighborhood of San Telmo and Montserrat had a large number of slaves, although most were later sent to the interior provinces. Due to the profit earned from the business, the slave trade industry became prominent, and about 70% of the trading activities in Buenos Aires involved capturing and importing slaves from Africa. Soon, it became a legalized trade in the country. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the government made a call for European immigrants, and this caused an increase in the number of white people due to the Europeans who migrated. With more European immigrants in Argentina, the prospects for a whiter country were achieved. Due to interracial marriages, a new mixed race was created, and this kept reducing the black skin color. The European immigrants affected the labor market, with former slaves and their descendants facing increased competition for employment. There was a rise in economic competition, combined with racial prejudice and discrimination. Deteriorating health conditions was another major factor that led to their decrease in population. In 1864 and 1871, the Afro-Argentines lost a higher percentage of their population to cholera and the yellow fever epidemic, respectively. Many Afro-Argentines lived in precarious conditions, with limited access to basic services such as clean water and sanitation. Moreover, they faced discrimination and social exclusion, which limited their access to medical care and other resources that could help them prevent or treat the disease. To have a better life and enjoy citizenship rights, they had to opt for an option to make their offspring white. The new generation of people born from interracial marriages were referred to as the non-whites, which was a superficial term that embodied the government's denial of its racial diversity. If Argentina's current population were to be studied, it would be noticed that the non-whites population is higher than both the pure blacks and the whites population. Interracial marriages functioned like a whitening cream. Accompanied by the whitening was a loss in their black identity, not just in genetic makeup and skin color, but in consciousness as well. About 90% of the people in Argentina today, who are identified to be white, is proof that many Argentines are ignorant of their ancestry to the extent that they really can't tell if they are indeed white, or they are descendants of Afro-Argentines. All of these factors contributed to the marginalization and eventual disappearance of the Afro-Argentine community. Today, Afro-Argentines make up a very small percentage of the overall population, estimated to be around 1% or less, and their cultural and historical contributions to Argentina are often overlooked and underrepresented.
You should be noticing a trend. It's the same story told over and over for these descendants of the slave trade. Again, if you stop looking at it through secular eyes of race and actually understand what the Bible has said and prophesied, you will see that there is a people scattered and cursed for the sins of their ancestors. Now, as I've shown, it is the same story over and over. But I want to highlight this point one more time because it's really important to really grasp. Because, understand, the devil knows Bible prophecy. Now, he can't stop it from being fulfilled, but he does do everything in his power to reduce the number of us that will walk in it. So what he did in South America was create a culture of intermingling that is a different version of assimilation. It was assimilation by intermingling. This documentary of the Vanishing Negro in Brazil explains it well.
Is not a ghetto. People live here not just because they are colored, but because they are poor. It is possible for the Negro to educate himself and move out, and he can also marry out.
My daughter is married to a white man, and she has no problem at all. She's very light-skinned, you know. And of course, she has 3 children now, and they're almost white.
Yes, I have Negro blood through my father. My great-grandfather was a mulatto. I looks like a white man. Nobody ever said to me that I'm a mulatto or I'm not a white man. And if I were a mulatto, perhaps I should not care about that. Why care?
Rare now to find a Negro of the pure dark type in Brazil. It's possible to find it, but it's very difficult because race mixture has been, miscegenation has been in Brazil, as you know, a process very much generalized. And the result of this is that the different intermediate types of race mixture are numerous in Brazil, and the survivals of pure Negro types very scarce, very rare.
We too in the United States have had miscegenation. One has but to take an objective view of the Negro in prominent positions in the leadership of the integration movement here in the United States to realize that many of these people are not by Brazilian standards Negro at all. We have a system, however, of reckoning racial identity which does not tolerate any intermediate status. Hence, we are faced here with a choice of being either Negro or white.
From abroad cannot comprehend us. He finds a Negro race which is intermixing with the white, and a new race is emerging. At first, he thinks this is a subtle form of prejudice, because the Negro is disappearing. But then, it would also be a subtle form of prejudice against the white, because the white man, as such, is disappearing also. But even if the Negro vanishes eventually as a pure race in Brazil, his influence and his mark on us are deep. We are convinced we are taking the right path, and that racial democracy may really be Brazil's great contribution to a universal humanistic culture.
A universal humanistic culture. Satan has been trying to wipe out Yah's chosen people. He is the author of confusion. But I don't want to get off track with that. I just want to highlight it. What I've shown you is just a small excerpt from South America. They're all scattered there. So let me make sure this is clear. What should be understood is that the people that were brought from Africa as slaves to South America, the same black Portuguese that Portugal sent down to Africa, were taken as slaves to South America, and they have been living through these curses. They are the same people going through our same plight. They are descendants from Israel and Judah. It is pure ignorance to believe that this was only about skin color, that it's only about race. I mean, really think about what are the odds that everyone just hates people with black or brown skin. I mean, most people that look at it like this are just leaving out the Bible entirely. Being hated because of your skin color really makes no sense when you have a biblical mindset. I mean, think about it. What are the odds and the chances that these people's lives align exactly with what our Father prophesied will be their plight of the Hebrews and the curses? Our curses are real. He says, moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder, and on your descendants forever. That's Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 45 through 46. And as I go through the evidence, this is what you're seeing with all these people scattered. But we have a lot more to discuss. So what we'll do is stop right here, and in the next part, we will deal with the Caribbean. So we'll move on to part C. Click the link to the next video, and let's talk some more. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay, thanks again for watching. Thank you for your patience with getting this information out. If this is blessing you, please don't forget to share this with your family and your friends. This is part B of part 10 of this series. Click this link or just move on to the next video in the playlist. As always, I want to thank all who donate and contribute to this ministry. Please know this series would not be possible without your support. I thank you sincerely. Be blessed. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. See you in the third part to part 10. I love you all.